Salvete omnes, this is Emilio, also known as the Martian Geek. It's time for another episode of the Bayonetta Scale. We've gone through every number rating from 1 to 11, but there are some games that I don't have a rating for. Obviously, anything that I don't mention at all during this whole project won't get a rating, but there are some games that I'm perfectly aware of and may even have played, or even if I haven't, I feel like they're worth mentioning, but I'm just not sure where exactly I'd place them on the scale. In many cases, I've played a little bit of a game, but not enough to make an informed judgment on how much I like it. Games that fall under this category include Street Fighter X Mega Man, or Street Fighter Cross Mega Man, whatever. Japan seems to use X to mean cross or crossover a lot of the time and pronounce it accordingly, which is weird because an X is not a cross. A cross has a vertical line and a horizontal line, and X has two diagonal lines. Get it straight! That nitpick aside, this is, as the name would suggest, a crossover between Street Fighter and Mega Man. It seems to be essentially a Mega Man game with Street Fighter bosses. It's a fan game that was made and released for Mega Man's and Street Fighter's 25th anniversary, and then it got officially supported by Capcom. The fact that it plays like a Mega Man game is a good thing, since I'm not into fighting games. It's one of those that I'd be awfully wary of doing blind, though. I don't know how good it is, or for that matter how hard it is, but my first inclination is not to trust fan-made content in that regard. So I'd probably want to play the game all the way through at least once on my own time before considering a Let's Play of it. The Trauma Center series. These are games where you're a doctor and have to do surgeries and other operations on people. It's especially centered on certain strange parasites engineered by a cult that have various patterns and themes to them. For instance, in the first game, the 7 strains are named after the days of the week in Greek, which is kind of silly if you know what they mean. Doc, will I be okay? I'm afraid it's bad news. You have Wednesday. The series started on the DS, and it actually uses the touchscreen for pretty much everything. Basically, on the other side of the fourth wall, the stylus is your surgical tool. The games are supposed to be pretty challenging. Well, they were published and presumably developed by Atlas, and I've never actually tried one, partly because I'm not sure if I have a strong enough stomach for them. I'm not actually sure if I'd currently be capable of LPing one even if I had more familiarity with them. I still don't have a capture card for the consoles in question, and while I could emulate the DS and Wii ones, and admittedly record the Wii ones for my Wii U like I did with Donkey Kong Country Returns, I suspect that the fine motor control required for the games would not work very well with the mouse, even with the high sensitivity at which I have mine set. I guess it might be more accurate than the Wii motion controls, though. I'd have to try it. Like I said, I kinda don't know. However I may feel about the gameplay, they seem like they'd be difficult to Let's Play. The Creon Conquest. This is a fairly obscure NES game that I found, or was pointed to, when trying to find decent 2D platformers. It seems to be another Mega Man-like game, where you jump, shoot, and get different power-ups. I'd like to play it more, on an emulator with save states. If I ever recorded it, I might have to break the rule about not using save states on camera, because apparently there are no checkpoints in the levels, at least not in each section. You can die in 1-2, for instance, and start at the beginning of 1-2, but if you lose a continue, you go back to 1-1. And in at least one version, I think you don't even get extra lives, which is yikes. Beyond that, like with many games here, I'd probably want to play it more on my own time to see more of what it's like. Journey to Silius, another NES run-and-gun platformer. I think this one is at least more forgiving than the Creon Conquest, though. It also has pretty good music, with good use of the DPCM channel. Once again, it could be fun, but I might want to practice it a bit first. Shatterhand. It's another NES game that I had to find out about, another platformer or at least 2D action game, except that this time, instead of shooting stuff, you punch it. It has another good soundtrack and some surprisingly good graphics for its time. Incidentally, this and Journey to Silius are 2 of the 3 NES games I own that aren't Mega Man. The third one is Kirby's Adventure, and I have yet to play any of them on the console. This game even has a Mega Man-like stage select where you can do the main stages in any order, though I don't think you get extra weapons from bosses like you do in Mega Man. It ought to be worth playing, maybe as a Let's Play, or maybe not. Bucky O'Hare. With this game falling into the same category as the last 3, our 8-bit gun-toting protagonist of choice is a green alien rabbit this time. So I guess this is one game that did the character from another planet who resembles an anthropomorphic Earth animal thing long before Copy Kitty did. You're given a choice of 4 main stages to do in any order, though here you actually rescue different characters that you can play as, which can actually be a problem because I think you can soft-lock yourself if you do the stages in the wrong order. That's easy to avoid if you know about it, but it's still a design flaw. It makes pretty clever use of the NES hardware. Heck, I'd be rather impressed with those big fire arcs in a 16-bit game, and it seems pretty decent. Celeste. This is an indie 2D platformer about a girl climbing a mountain, or something. I think it's supposed to symbolize overcoming her depression. You know, whenever someone says that they want to make a game or story or whatever that's symbolic, I always think, okay, there's a 90% chance you learned all the wrong lessons from high school English class, but you do you. Bonus points if the symbolism has anything to do with the Bible or involves the number 7. I haven't played this, so I can't say how shoehorned in the symbolism is or isn't. It's supposed to be pretty difficult, though, as if any indie 2D platformer with pixel art ever isn't. Maybe that's just the secret levels, but if I understand correctly, those are 2/3 of the game. I don't particularly feel like playing a game where 2/3 of the game is basically Kaizo, unless I just play the remaining 1/3, but maybe it's not as bad as it sounds? I do get extremely tired of seemingly every indie 2D platform game developer feeling like they have to make their game uber difficult, though, especially if it's done in retro style. They're supposed to be like games were back in the day, but I feel like some retro games weren't actually as hard as indie games that tried to mimic them. While some of them were much improved upon in future games in the same series, some of them were hard for the wrong reasons, and some of them nobody plays anymore because they suck. And there's a considerable amount of overlap between those categories. Anyway, we'll add Celeste to the list of games that I feel like I'd need to do a full playthrough of before judging whether it's suitable for a Let's Play. VVVVVV, or V, or 6Vs, or VV, however you're supposed to pronounce that. It's another difficult retro-styled indie game, because of course it is. The gimmick for this one is that instead of jumping, you navigate the world by flipping your personal gravity, which seems like it would take a while to get used to. Also, there are a lot of death spikes. And apparently Bennett Foddy had a hand in this, which does the opposite of endear me to it. I don't think he did any of the development, just came up with the room names, but still, anything that he was involved in I have to regard with suspicion. I'm also not sure what the controls are like. Since you can basically only do two things, move and flip, they should be simple, but if they're hard-coded to use the arrow keys, then it's almost a definite no. I really can't play side-scrollers with the arrow keys. I must investigate this further to see if it's worth my time. Super Meat Boy. I'm sensing a pattern here. Indie game? Check. Retro-styled? Check. 2D platformer? Check. High difficulty? Check. Edgy humor? Well, that's new. There are worse options out there, but I don't think this game is for me. 1001 Spikes. Given the name and what we've been talking about, you get no prizes for guessing what kind of game this is. You get 1001 lives to make it through a bunch of grueling platforming, traps, trial and error gameplay, and whatnot. What is it with indie developers and wanting to make games that are excruciatingly difficult and frustrating for the players? They're not as bad in that regard as ROM hackers, especially Kaizo hackers, but geez people, even EA doesn't do that kind of crap. Maybe because that kind of crap doesn't appeal to most people and they want to make money. This, like most indie games I'm aware of, got brought up when it was announced for some console that was current at the time, probably the Wii U or 3DS, but frankly I could hardly care less. Touhou Scarlet Curiosity. I honestly have no recollection of how I even found out about this game. It could have been Steam recommendations, an online forum, a Discord server, who knows. I suspect it had something to do with Falcom games though, and the reason I think that is because of how this game plays. I've been told that it plays very similarly to the East games, and having tried out the first level or two for myself, I'm inclined to agree. I certainly like the gameplay better than the actual Touhou games though, and not just because you could actually save the game. Frankly, that series has a lot of interesting character concepts that are wasted on a game of its genre. What little I played of this seemed reasonably fun in any case, so I'd be willing to continue with it. Guermin, A Monstrous Adventure. It's another Ys-like game, except I haven't tried playing it yet, so yeah, there's not much I can say about this one. Zwei, The Ilvard Insurrection. Yet another Ys-ish action RPG, say that 3 times fast, and unlike the last one, this was actually made by Falcom and published in English by Xseed, so I'd expect it to be even more like Ys, but I haven't played this either. Also, if I did LP it, I'd have to decide whether to pronounce its name the German way or pronounce it like an ignorant American, so yeah. Kirby in general. Kirby is one of the big Nintendo series that I kind of missed, or at least slept on. I obviously played the heck out of Mario and Donkey Kong, tried Zelda and mostly didn't care for it, tried Pokemon and mostly didn't care for it, and tried Metroid and mostly didn't care for it. Kirby, however, is kind of a question mark. Part of it is how easy it seems to be to trivialize a lot of the enemies and platforming. I'm not generally one to complain about a game being too easy, certainly not as frequently as games being too hard, but a lot of Kirby games seem too easy even for me. And when they finally do get serious, it can be something of a problem because Kirby is quite slow and chunky, and in at least one of the games you have to double tap to run, which I absolutely hate. and its games seem to have a habit of putting collectibles in places where by the time you see and react to them, it's too late to get them without restarting the level. I actually played through the entirety of Kirby's Return to Dreamland with my nephew around late 2021 to early 2022, and it seemed alright. We kind of sucked at it at times, but that tends to happen when you have two players with a large skill gap between them playing something they're not used to. I've heard that the newest Kirby game, Kirby and the Forgotten Land, is very good, and I've heard good things about Kirby 64. The earlier games in the series would be easy to emulate, of course, though the later ones seem to have more hits. At least one of the DS and 3DS games apparently hardcodes the controls to A and B rather than B and Y, which is a really boneheaded decision by Nintendo that they kept making from what I've heard, and a great argument for why all games should have customizable button mapping, or why Nintendo should have put A and B where B and Y are in the first place. Seriously, does anyone find that arrangement comfortable in any game? Unless Nintendo's only playtester was Ridley, how did they fail to notice that that button pair is at a very different angle on the DS and 3DS compared to the NES or Game Boy line? And honestly, it's not that comfy on the Game Boy either. Anyway, getting off topic here. Kirby is a big enough series that's close enough to what I like that I can't imagine that I'd go my entire Let's Playing career without ever playing any Kirby games, but which of them I'd play and whether they'd be blind or not, I'm not sure about. Any Wario games? I've watched a few LPs of them, but I've never played a Wario game myself. I think part of it is that Wario has no appeal for me as a character. At least Kirby's cute. Wario's just a gross, ugly, annoying jerk. I'd way rather have a game about, like, almost any of his supporting characters, like Mona, Cat and Anna, or 9-Volt. The Wario Land games might be worth at least trying out, but I don't think WarioWare even has any appeal in its gameplay. Do a bunch of minigames that literally take 3 seconds to complete. Yay? I don't know, folks. Yoshi's Crafted World. This is the Switch's only Yoshi game, a clear follow-up on Yoshi's Woolly World. Someday, maybe Nintendo will make more Yoshi games that aren't based around craft supplies. What's next? Yoshi's Origami World? No, wait, that's been done. Yoshi's Recycled Junk World? Yoshi's Fairy Garden World? I don't know. I haven't played it yet, and I've seen conflicting opinions on how good it is. If I had to guess, I'd say it would have to be either slightly better or a bit worse than Woolly World. Clearly worse than the original Yoshi's Island, but still way better than Yoshi's Story, Island DS, or New Island. It's strange how Yoshi's Island can be known for being such a classic series despite only having one unambiguously good game. Anyway, it's another game in my backlog that I really need to get to. The nature of Yoshi games being what they are, I can't imagine I'd do it blind unless I specifically didn't bother going for completion. Then again, if it's at all like Woolly World, it won't be worth the trouble to try for 100% anyway. Wonder what important items they hide in invisible clouds and random patches of seemingly empty air here. That about sums it up, though. Rystar. Another game that I'm pretty sure I was first made aware of via its music. This is a Genesis platformer. I have yet to play any Genesis games on here, and I suppose this might be an okay choice. For all that it's praised, though, I remember playing the first level or so and not thinking that it was anything special, aside from the unique grabbing and grappling mechanics anyway, and it was a bit confusing to navigate. Nothing about it suggested that I'd hate it, but nothing suggested that I'd love it either, so for this game we'll go with a resounding maybe. Code of Princess. The only reason I know about this game is because the boss theme, or at least one of the boss themes, was among the first 3DS MIDIs submitted to VG Music, and it was pretty good. From what I've seen of the rest of the game, though, it doesn't look like it would appeal to me. It's a beat-em-up, a genre that I'm not generally fond of, and it's even worse with the skimpy outfits than Shantae is. The main character's outfit is about 10 square inches away from being a birthday suit, so no thanks. Katamari Damacy. This is a game for which the genre is hard to pin down. No, Patrick, quirky Japanese oddity is not a genre. I've never played it, but I've seen videos of it. You have a ball, and you roll up stuff with it until it gets bigger, and you can roll up more stuff. That's about it. I've heard that the controls are kind of funky too. Not really sure what to make of this one. Mischief Makers. This would be the other Nintendo 64 game that I'm actually interested in. It's a 2D platformer, and it might very well be the best one on the system because there are probably only about 2 others to choose from. You play as a robot maid who can jump, dash, and shake things. I vaguely recalled seeing like one level in an issue of Nintendo Power once, but didn't remember what game it was from until I asked around. I'd like to play it more on my own time. Jak and Daxter. Once upon a time I tried to find more 3D platformers, once it weren't Crash Bandicoot or Mario, and this is one of the more well-known ones that I came across. Sadly, like most of them, it seems to be an open-world 3D game, which for me is simply another way to say getting lost simulator. Maybe I'll try it again when I have a good chunk of time and I'm not worried about being productive. I don't know, though. Ratchet and Clank. Basically, this is the same situation as Jak and Daxter, just with more of a science fiction bent. I'm not any less likely to play it than that game, nor am I any more likely. Sly Cooper, another 3D platformer series that started on the PlayStation 2, and another game that I had trouble getting into. In this case, it doesn't help that at least parts of the game also have stealth gameplay, and whenever I encounter that in a game, my reaction is pretty much always some variant of, how tiresome. I got the first Jak and Daxter, Ratchet and Clank, and Sly Cooper game all at the same time, and my feelings were pretty much exactly the same for all three of them, that being that they could be cool if I had the patience to explore open-world 3D games, but I usually don't. But hey, at least they were cheap. Ty the Tasmanian Tiger. If you're not familiar with this game, it's more of the same. I can't say that I have the same feelings about this one though, because I haven't actually played it yet. I don't have it for the PS2 either. It's actually on Steam, so that would be the version that I'd try. If it's at all like the last three though, or if it's a collectathon, which I think the last three might also have been, I probably won't stick with it long. Kaya Dark Lineage. Well, it's yet another PS2 game and a 3D platformer action game of sorts, but I think this one might be more combat-oriented and it's much less known. I think I found this one looking at similar games or something. I have not played this one yet either, and I got my copy of it probably 7 or more years ago. Gotta love that backlog mentality. Maybe if retro game sellers and speculators would quit jacking the prices of everything up so much like the unscrupulous capitalist scum they are, I wouldn't have to buy games way before ever intending to play them. This game, though, was actually pretty cheap. I got it for about $7 or $8. It looked interesting. But, of course, not having played it, I don't have much idea about whether I'd want to let's play it. Any Rayman games. You know how sometimes works of media come along that you like but can't figure out why you like them because nothing about them suggests that you would like it? I've had that happen a couple times. A readily accessible example is the Crows games. Well, sometimes the opposite of that happens, where you don't really like something that by all rights you should like, which is what these are. I've played Rayman 1, 2, 3, and Origins, and I could never quite get into any of them, but I'm not really sure why. I had the same problem with Azure Striker Gunvolt, actually. Maybe the physics were too loose, maybe I didn't like feeling like I needed to collect everything, maybe the style was just too bizarre for me, I don't know. Rayman 2 and 3 at least had the excuse of being, once again, nonlinear 3D games, but the 2D ones didn't. Maybe I need to try Rayman Origins again and just not overthink it. Final Fantasy Crystal Chronicles. I've heard good things about this. One of my friends has it as his favorite game. The remastered version doesn't seem to be liked very well, though I'm not sure why unless it's simply the lack of local multiplayer. That, however, might be the problem here, because just like with Tales games, I don't actually have anyone around for local multiplayer, and it seems like doing it alone wouldn't be as fun. I can't even decide if I should play it on my own time, though at least the GameCube version is surprisingly cheap. But then I never really liked playing Tales games alone either, so who knows. Soul Saga. This is an indie RPG, possibly the first fully 3D indie RPG, that got kickstarted back in the early 2010s by a guy who goes by Disaster Cake. Unfortunately, in 2022, it still doesn't seem to be done. It's gone through some troubled development for sure, troubling for the creator as well as the fans. And it certainly doesn't seem to be for lack of effort. He was apparently working 100 hours a week on it at one point, which is pretty crazy. I just wonder if he dreamed too big, if he either should have started with something simpler or gotten a lot more people involved with it from the start. Also, the gameplay has changed in a few ways from how it started out. Now there's airship combat, procedural generation, and other stuff. And honestly, several of the things he added were things that I would have rather not had, to be honest, namely random encounters instead of pre-existing ones, an ATB system, and roguelike elements. Sigh. I guess at least the ATB actually has a point in the battle system, unlike in Final Fantasy where they appear to have just tossed it in because they felt like it. There's no such excuse for the others though. If you're gonna do random encounters, at least make the rate adjustable like Bravely Default did. And I don't think I've ever played a game with good randomly generated levels or environments. I was excited for the game at first, but I got less so as development progressed. I went from, wow, a new indie turn-based RPG, it looks cool, to, wow, you took the 3 things I hate most in RPGs and put them into a game that I paid for that didn't originally have any of them. Awesome, 5 stars, that totally makes me want to play your game instead of just replaying Bravely Second again. I can't be too hard on the guy though, anyone who's willing to spend that much time on any creative project deserves some commendation. Obviously, I hope that Disaster Cake finishes the game and that it's good. I just wish the game would get definitively finished, and then I could find out for myself how much I like it. At least the music is good, from what I've heard. A lot of it was written by Ivy Tran, who apparently also did some of the music for Steven Universe. The game itself, well, regardless of its quality or lack thereof, it's an RPG and it's not even officially released yet, so while I'd like to spread awareness of it, a let's play of it is doubtful. Cryamore. This is another indie game, though this is more of an action RPG or action-adventure game. I think I first heard about it around the same time as Soul Saga, but I haven't heard any news about it in years. Ivy Tran wrote some music for this, too. Beyond that, the main thing I remember the developers saying is that they weren't implementing an in-game map because Esmeralda, the spunky heroine, is an adventurer who explores uncharted lands or something. Well, one, how exactly is that a valid excuse for eschewing a quality of life feature anyway? And two, if she's an explorer, shouldn't she be making a map as she goes? Zelda had a map. Heck, even Etrian freaking Odyssey had a map, and when Etrian Odyssey is outshining your standards for modern convenience, something has clearly gone wrong somewhere. Maybe that's why they called it Cryamore. Not knowing where I'm going would certainly make me cry more. Unfortunately, it's another one that never got finished or released, and aside from a lot of people being mad at the primary developer and artist, I don't know what's going on with it, so probably won't do this one. Disgaea. I think this is a tactical RPG. It's one of those series that I've heard mentioned often but know little about. I don't know how hard it is or how good it is with QOL stuff, but I do know that in my experience I am garbage at SRPGs, so I don't see this being too likely either. Spyro games beyond the first 5. For one, I barely played any Spyro games beyond the first 5. I finished the original Ripto's Rage, Year of the Dragon, Enter the Dragonfly, and I think A Hero's Tale, though I may not have 100% completed that one, but that's pretty much it. I played the first Legend of Spyro game, didn't get very far in it, and remember almost nothing about it, and I played at least one of the Game Boy Advance games on an emulator a little. From what I've heard, there are actually quite a few spin-off Spyro games, most of which I've never heard of, but if they're not as good as Spyro 1 through 5, considering that those games are already rather unlikely, I probably wouldn't play them on here, unless they made some changes to gameplay style that I prefer, such as actually being platformers instead of collectathons. It might be something worth checking out on my own time. Does anyone have any recommendations? Slay the Spire. Okay, I kind of discussed this already during the level 10 video. It wasn't the same game, but this is another roguelike, which about says it all. I don't know if it has the horror theme that Darkest Dungeon does, but I figure that if I've seen one roguelike, I've pretty much seen them all, and I barely even needed to see one. Someone who would see randomly generated levels and fewer no checkpoints as appealing clearly has such a different mentality from me when it comes to things they enjoy in video games, they might as well be a different species. Elysia Dragoon. This is a Genesis game, and it's a side-scrolling action game, which is good, though it does one of those things that I tend to dislike and has enemies keep spawning in from the sides of the screen to attack you. I seem to recall it having some pretty ear-splitting sound effects too, though I just checked that again and didn't have a problem with it, so maybe it was just poor emulation. Might be something to check out, though I don't know whether or not I'd want to do a full LP of it. Pulseman. Another lesser-known Genesis game. This one at least doesn't have continually spawning enemies, but what I played didn't have much level design either. It didn't wow me, but it was okay, I guess. Vector Man. It's yet another Genesis game, and like the last two, it didn't really draw me in, but I played too little of it to have any major impressions of it. Someday, maybe I will actually try to go back and play most of those games that I downloaded, played about half a level of, and then just kind of left in my ROM folder until further notice. Whether I do any of them as Let's Plays, honestly, who knows. Super Magnetic Neo. This is a 3D platformer for the Dreamcast, which pretty much makes it relatively unknown by default. I came across it when I was desperately trying to find more games that played similarly to Crash Bandicoot and Super Mario 3D Land and World. I imagine you lovely people already know this, because I've probably grumbled about it on here before, but it is ridiculously hard to find any other games that play like Crash Bandicoot. Given how popular that series was, you'd think developers would have made more like it. Clearly, games where you play the same levels 8 times or spend 90% of your time just wandering around looking for a zillion items were much more appealing styles to take inspiration from for their 3D platformers. Darned lousy games with questionable priorities. Anyway, in this game, your character has a pair of magnets, which he uses to do stuff. Probably for platforming. I haven't played this. I'm not sure about the best way to play Dreamcast games, though I think at least one of the Sega emulators is multi-console and maybe supports it, so I should probably at least try it out if I can find it. Donald Duck Goin' Quackers. I was going to mention this when talking about the previous game and how it's another of the precious few Crash Bandicoot-like games, and then I realized that I hadn't actually planned to talk about this one, so yeah. There are multiple different versions of this game because it was on at least 6 different consoles in some form, and I don't know what the differences are. From the level or two I played, it's kind of like Crash Bandicoot if you removed all the challenge. Maybe it gets more exciting later, maybe it doesn't. At least if I do decide to push onward with it, it wasn't frustrating. There actually seem to be quite a few Donald Duck games that I haven't played or have barely played. There's even less that I can say about them, though. Grandia. Now this game came from my era of let's look for more RPGs since the first two PlayStations have such a reputation for them. I actually own the original PS1 game, though it got remade for the PC, so I have it and the immediate sequel on Steam as well. I barely played it either, though. RPGs in general are difficult propositions for Let's Plays. Lunar Silver Star Story. It's another PS1 RPG, though it's apparently a remake of the Sega CD game. I actually own the fancy edition of this game even, the one with the art book and cloth map and stuff. I found it used online, and I really wish that I'd done the same for Lunar 2 before it got even more expensive. This game is in much the same boat as Grandia. Some person said that it was one of the best RPGs ever made, and Cody Kitty said that it was hugely overrated. From what I played, which was again not a lot, I had two main impressions. I was very glad that it used pre-existing encounters rather than random ones, but I was not so glad that it apparently started off with some mandatory grinding. Yeah, in the first dungeon I had to get up to level 5 before the enemies would quit just murdering my face off, which meant lots of short dungeon dives followed by trips to the inn. I don't think I got far enough to fight any bosses. Beyond that, though, let me just reiterate the last sentence that I said about the previous game. Cartia, The Word of Fate. Another PS1 RPG, though this one is a tactical RPG rather than straight turn-based. As I said earlier, my impression of SRPGs is that I'm terrible at them. Besides Disgaea, I previously mentioned Fire Emblem and Luminous Arc. I haven't really played any of the Final Fantasy Tactics line. I think I did one or two fights in the Game Boy Advance one, and that was it. I also haven't actually played Cartia. I have the ROM, but I don't have the disc. And this game is even less likely than the last two. Earthbound. This is a game that's kind of hurt by its good reputation. I mean, I will fully admit that I am not a fan of most 16-bit RPGs. Out of all the RPGs on the Super Nintendo that I've played, I've still only encountered one that I would consider genuinely good, along with two or three that I can tolerate but wouldn't go out of my way to play. Earthbound, though, it's one of those things that people gush over so much that it can't possibly be as good as the hype suggests, so when you finally do experience it if you haven't already, it will most likely be a letdown. Kind of like Undertale, though I suspect that Undertale is probably better, with better story and more modern design. They both have crappy graphics, though. I think the battle system is basically straight turn-based, with a slight addition of characters' health not taken down immediately, which only really affects short battles where you can finish it before they lose all the health that they were supposed to. From what I've heard, the immediate sequel, Mother 3, because Earthbound was called Mother 2 in Japan, actually has an action command system, so that one might be more interesting. Whether either is suitable for the channel is doubtful, though. Dragon Quest. One of the most long-running and classic JRPG series of all time. In fact, the first Dragon Quest game actually predates the first Final Fantasy game. But while Final Fantasy varied up the formula seemingly every game so that you never know what the heck to expect from one, Dragon Quest went to the other extreme and has barely changed since 1986, aside from its one MMO. The newest ones at least dropped the random encounters, so that's something, but the battle system is about as no-frills as you can get. And it's not even the best version of such a system. You have graphics for characters, enemies, and attacks. Do you really need to tell me that Slime A attacked the protagonist and did 50 damage instead of just showing me? Now, the game in the series that I played the most of was Dragon Quest IX. It seems to be considered one of the weaker entries, but I picked it because at the time I got it, it was the only one without random encounters. I've since also tried part of the demo for Dragon Quest XI, but I still have quite a ways to go before finishing that. Though I will say I wish the Steam version didn't force you to map separate keys for moving your character and navigating menus. Dragon Quest IX, though, it seemed rather dull and kinda grindy, and I don't think that's just an issue with that particular game either. I didn't hate the game, I'd play it on a long road trip, but I wouldn't go out of my way to play it either. I wouldn't think, oh boy, when I get home today I'll get to play more Dragon Quest. The gameplay was just so simplistic, and not even in a convenient way. I'm not really sure why the series is so popular, to be honest. I just feel like there have to be better RPGs out there. Maybe people mainly play them for the story? In any case, from what I've seen, they're way longer than Trails in the Sky and less interesting, so if no one cared about that game, I doubt they'd care about these. Overwatch. I feel like I've heard a lot about this game, but I've never actually tried it. I do think that it has some interesting character designs at least, but assuming that it's a third-person online multiplayer shooter, I doubt I'd like it. It might be worth trying it with friends, but it's probably not my kind of game. ARMS. This is another of those games where my impression was pretty much interesting character designs shame about the genre. It's quirky and colorful, but I'd rather be playing Mario or Mega Man. Again, I'd try it with friends, but you know. Klonoa. This is a 2D or 2.5D platformer series that started on the PS1. Notably, the original PS1 version was about $45 used at one point. I didn't get it then, and I checked back a few years later to find that it had more than tripled in price. The sequel and Wii port aren't much better. I'll save my rant about retro game prices for another day though, especially since I already touched on it earlier. What I played of this was cute, and I'd be interested in trying more of it, but as usual, I don't quite know if I'd want to LP it blindly. I'd probably want to gain more familiarity with it in the other Klonoa games. It's worth noting that the first two games are actually getting a remake for modern consoles, Klonoa Fantasy Reverie, and that's actually releasing very soon, on July 8th. I've heard that the physical version won't get a North American release though, so I'll probably import a Switch copy from Europe in addition to getting the Steam version. You know, the usual method when a game is on both PC and Switch. At least the original version is pretty easy to emulate though. New Super Lucky's Tale. Here's another 3D platformer, another game that I bought a while back and still haven't played, and another game that I have on the Switch and, well, actually I only have this one for the Switch, because apparently the other platforms got a different version, or at least that's what they had at the time. I think they did get later updates, but I'm not sure. There's Lucky's Tale, Super Lucky's Tale, and New Super Lucky's Tale, and I'm not sure what the differences are between them. I assume that they're increasingly improved versions of the same game, though. Since I haven't played it yet, I don't know how closely it follows what I want in a 3D platformer. Zoombinis, also known as The Logical Journey of the Zoombinis. This is another of the few PC games that I played as a kid, though my family never actually had it. I only got to play it at a specific other person's house. It's basically a logic game where you have to solve different puzzles based on the titular Zoombinis, strange creatures that can have different permutations of characteristics. It also got 2 sequels, but they weren't as well liked. Far fewer people know about them, and certainly fewer people have played them, me not included among them, so I can't speak for those. I enjoyed this game enough that I think it would be interesting to show off on the channel, but the tricky part might be deciding how to structure it. It strikes me as the kind of game that would definitely be better suited for an analytic Let's Play than a regular one. I'd also have to decide which version I want to show, since the first game got a remake. Perhaps I could even do both, assuming that I can get them both to work. The reason why that might be a problem is how old the original version is. It's not the oldest PC game out there by any means, but it's old enough that one of the system text boxes mentioned an offer for a discount on something else, and the coupon expired in 2003. So that gives you an idea of the time frame here. It's right around the same time that I played Roller Coaster Tycoon for the first time, as well as all those MSN games. I'd still like to show it off if I can, though. The Legend of Dark Witch. This is an action 2D platformer that seems heavily inspired by Mega Man, though with a power-up system inspired by Gradius and other side-scrolling arcade shooters, which is not necessarily a good thing since it results in even more punishment for dying than usual. I have it, the sequel, and the remake on Steam and have completely neglected to play any of them, as one does. I did, however, play the demo available on the 3DS, which let you play through one of the stages. I remember having kind of a hard time with it, feeling like it was simultaneously empty and overly difficult to get through, but it has been a long time since I did that, and of course I only got to try one level. I'd like to at least try this again on my own time, even if a Let's Play is still up in the air. Super Mario Maker. While this is primarily a level editor, it does have a story mode with some included levels as examples. I won't go into too much detail about the editor itself. It will suffice to say that every time I've tried it, I just felt like I'd rather be using Lunar Magic, because that combined with third-party resources for Super Mario World offer way more options than you get from Super Mario Maker, and it always felt much too limiting to make anything decent. And no, automatic levels, Kaizo, and anything that resembles a bad ROM hack don't qualify as decent. Maybe I'll talk more about it in a different video. As for the levels in the story mode, though, well, a worthy successor to New Super Mario Bros. U or any other original 2D Mario platformer, it ain't. I watched a full LP of it back in 2019, and it did little to sell me on the levels. The player rated each level on a scale from 1 to 5 as he played them, calling them either bad, mediocre, decent, good, or excellent, and the average score of all the levels didn't even break 3. There are 19 levels that were considered terrible, which is more than the number of good levels and over twice as many as the number of great levels. 16% of the levels were terrible, and 44% weren't even decent. How many of those scores I'd agree with, I don't know, but they definitely say something about the quality. That's a worse track record than any regular 2D Mario game that I can think of. Even the Lost Levels had a better average than that. And I don't know how possible it is to skip the crap and only play the good levels. I'd love to get a new 2D Mario platformer from Nintendo instead of relying on ROM hackers to produce them, but if this is the best they can give us in 10 years, I'll stick to the hacks. Bowser's Fury. From what I've seen of this, it actually is worthwhile content, not really the length of a full game unless you're comparing it to 8-bit games, and probably not as good as Super Mario 3D World itself, but still fun, assuming that you like Super Mario 3D World. Well, Super Mario 3D World may be my favorite 3D Mario game ever, but I have the Wii U version of it, and Bowser's Fury is exclusive to the Switch version. If it were ever to be sold as a standalone game, presumably a pretty cheap one, I'd be willing to at least try it, but I just can't justify paying $60 for what is basically 5 hours of DLC, or even the $45 or so that it goes for on eBay. Mega Man and Bass Challenger from the Future. This is a sort of sequel to Mega Man and Bass. I say sort of because it had a completely different developer from the rest of the series, and from what I've read, doesn't really meet the same quality standards. It also only released in Japan, and it was exclusive to the WonderSwan, and if your immediate reaction to that statement is, what the heck is that, I can think of no better point for why it might be tricky to do as a Let's Play. I think at least one version of Higun could emulate it, though who knows how easy it would be to track down a ROM. Honestly, I'm not that strapped for more Mega Man games to play. Mega Man Powered Up. This, on the other hand, might be a more worthy pursuit. It's a reimagining of the original Mega Man for the PSP, with the same 6 Robot Masters plus 2 new ones and completely redesigned stages. I haven't had much luck emulating PSP games, but it has admittedly been a while since I've tried, so I might have a good enough computer for it now. I figured if I ever got a PSP, immediate purchases would be this and Trails in the Sky, though I think I can cross the ladder off unless I discover a long-lost rich relative, because that game goes for upward of $150 now. Anyway, I have yet to play this game, but I'd like to. Manichemia. This is a spin-off of the Atelier series, almost like what Persona is to Shin Megami Tensei, minus the part where it eclipses the main series. There are 2 of these, both for the PS2, and they both predate the Arland games and seem to be the most well-liked games in the series before then. I have both of the original discs and ROMs of them, and I've enjoyed what I've played, aside from the day and night mechanic combined with the density of monsters in some areas, making it almost impossible to get through certain sections without either save state spamming, waiting around for 12 in-game hours, or having monsters murder your face. The biggest problem with Let's Playing either or both of them is that they're RPGs, and as stated before, those take a lot of time and effort. If I ever do any videos where I just take a quick look at a game, I could see these featuring in it. I probably wouldn't do them as full Let's Plays, though. Braid. This is a 2D platformer with a time rewinding mechanic, as well as a lot of puzzle elements and symbolism. It's also one of those games that is supposedly ruined if you look up plot spoilers, which naturally makes me immediately want to look up plot spoilers to see what all the fuss is about and if the journey would be worth my time. And frankly, I suspect that it wouldn't. Symbolism is a pretty tricky thing to get right in media, see my earlier mention of Celeste, and deconstruction is just as difficult or more so, and putting them both into one work seems like an easy recipe for pretentiousness. Then of course there are the puzzle elements. If the story didn't confuse me, the puzzles probably would. I can't make a definite judgment on it because, of course, I haven't played it, but I'm in no real hurry to do so anyway. Splatoon. This game sure took off, didn't it? It's another third-person shooter, if a cartoony one, so I can't muster that much enthusiasm for it. Admittedly, I haven't tried any of the story modes. I don't own the game, so I only ever play it when my nephew brings it over or I'm at his house, and I'm pretty sure he's better than me at it despite being 7. He also really wants to get Splatoon 3 when that comes out. What could be fun is if he and I streamed Splatoon 3 right after launch, but I haven't really tried any sort of streaming, nor have I tried recording off a Switch, so I'd want to make darn sure that I could do both of those things beforehand, even on the off chance that we'd be able to do it, which is still not terribly likely. Stardew Valley. This is one of those games that's sort of RPG combined with farming simulator, maybe more of the latter actually. That's a gameplay style that always seemed like it would be pretty boring for me. I mean, I guess I'd try it. I did get the game during a Steam sale, and I bought the Switch version of Rune Factory 4 on impulse. Naturally, I haven't played either. Beyond that, the only thing I know about this game is a bug that was in some versions where you could get free items by putting item numbers in the character's name, which is kind of hilarious. I wonder what would happen if you named them Robert Drop Table Students. Anyway, I can't say for sure, but this probably isn't something that I need to spend LP time on. Nezumi Man. This is another Mega Man-inspired fan game, except that this time, rather than robots, you fight a bunch of mice, and a kangaroo, and a fish, and some other random weird stuff. I'd play it, at least. Considering the perfect runs of this game were ages ago, I'm not really sure why I haven't tried it already. As far as doing a Let's Play of it, semi-blind or otherwise, well, I managed to get through Mega Man Rock'n'Roll okay, and I wouldn't expect it to be more difficult than that. I don't think I'd do it before finishing the actual Mega Man games, though. I just want to be single! This game isn't actually out yet. It was on Kickstarter and has an estimated release date of June 2023. It's described by the creators as an anti-dating sim. You play as an aromantic, asexual, non-binary person who's shy, socially anxious, has trouble making friends, and is a new student at a school for girls, and the objective is not to date anyone. You're supposed to be affectionate enough to make friends with people, but not so much that they think you're interested in them romantically. Boy, were they spying on my life when coming up with inspiration for this or what? Well, except for the part about going to an all-girls school. I'm still trying to figure out if I'd ever be able to get into one of those. Anyway, the premise seems cute, and maybe it would be more endearing than a typical dating sim or similar visual novel. It could be interesting to do on a stream if I ever got into that. Long Live the Queen. It's another sim/visual novel, though instead of trying to get into relationships, you're a princess who's trying to become queen and not get assassinated. I only got this game because a friend suggested trying it, basically saying that I might be amused by it. Well, even though he and I both like video games, our preferences don't overlap much. The number of games that we both like is almost nil. It's possible that this could end up being one of those games that I like inexplicably, but it seems far more likely that it wouldn't interest me. So I guess the whole attempt to branch out of my comfort zone with media and fail miserably thing is still going on in 2022. I haven't failed on this particular game yet, but I'm not counting on it either. Crosscode. This is another indie game, an action RPG, that I heard about fairly recently. It seems to be well liked, and it could be good, but I haven't tried it yet. Grapple Force Rena. Another indie game that I haven't tried but would be willing to. It looks and sounds sort of like if Mischief Makers were a Genesis game. I don't know much else about it, though. Kaze and the Wild Masks. Another indie game and another 2D platformer. This one, however, seems to take a lot of inspiration from Donkey Kong Country, and I'm always in the mood for more Donkey Kong Country. So out of the various indie games that I've discussed, this looks like one of the most promising. Ekenfell. Another indie game, this time an RPG. Somebody suggested I look into this, though I forget who. I'll get to it, eventually. I have so many games in my backlog. Anyway. Sydney Hunter and the Curse of the Mayan. Why isn't it Curse of the Maya? Anyway, this is another indie retro-style 2D platformer, and I don't even remember where I found out about it. It's another one where I have little idea what to expect beyond the genre. Pedal Crash. Yet another indie game, and this one is a puzzle game. I liked some of those puzzle games from the early 2000s, so maybe I'd like this. And even if I don't, hey, it's only $10, even if you don't get it during a Steam sale. I'm sure I've mentioned before that I tend to be far more willing to buy indie games without trying them than AAA games, mainly because they tend to be much cheaper. Paying $10 or $20 for something and not liking it is frustrating, but paying $40 for it, or worse, $60, and not liking it is much, much worse. Anyway, it doesn't really seem like the kind of game that would be worth doing a full-on LP of, but I'd like to at least try it. KO the Kangaroo. Well, actually, no, this is what one might term a mainstream game. It's a remake of a 3D platformer from the year 2000 that was on the Dreamcast and PC, the latter of which kind of surprises me. I didn't realize that there were any platformers on the PC in 2000. 3D platformers, as I've said, are pretty hit or miss for me, especially outside the context of their time. There are some of them that are worth playing in 2022, but there don't seem to be a lot, especially if you hate collectathons as much as I do. I still want to try this game, I just have to hope that it leans more toward Crash Bandicoot than Banjo-Kazooie. That also determines whether or not I'd want to Let's Play it. New Super Marissa Land. I tried playing this back in, probably 2010 or so. It's a fan game that plays like a new Super Mario Bros. Game except with Toho characters, and it was not as good as the actual new Super Mario Bros. Games. The graphics and music were fine, but from what I remember, the level design definitely felt unprofessional at times, especially where the difficulty curve is concerned. I don't think I ever got more than about halfway through, maybe to the first mountain level or so, but I haven't thought about it much since. Game consoles that I've never done anything from. This obviously isn't a specific gamer series, but you may have noticed that there are a number of consoles, some quite popular, that have yet to get any representation on the channel. I've played at least one game on each of the original Nintendo, Super Nintendo, PlayStation 1, PlayStation 2, Wii, Wii U, original Game Boy, Game Boy Advance, DS, and PC. I have not played anything from the Nintendo 64, GameCube, Switch, Game Boy Color, 3DS, PlayStation 3, PlayStation 4, any Sega or Microsoft consoles, or anything not from one of the big four. Most often, this is due to their libraries not offering much, if anything, that I find worth playing. This is particularly notable with the Nintendo 64. As renowned as it is, I mainly like 2D platformers and RPGs, while I hate collectathons, as mentioned, so me playing that console is kind of like someone who likes hot weather and sunny beaches deciding to vacation in Norway. I'm not really sure what you play on the GameCube either. I at least somewhat enjoyed Thousand Year Door, even if they were definitely better Mario RPGs, but I only own 3 games for the system and haven't found a lot more. It seems like most of the games that I'd at least be somewhat interested in tend to have a PS2 version or a remake, or they're insanely expensive. At least Dolphin seems to be a decent emulator if I do find something worth LPing for it. I do have a Switch, though as mentioned, I haven't tried recording from it, and honestly I've found the Switch's library to fall continually short, which is another topic that I should elaborate on at a future date. I don't own a PS3, though funny enough I do have 2 games for it. I played the first 2 Trails of Cold Steel games on a former roommate's console, and now that they're also on PC, it's fairly pointless for me to have them other than them being physical copies and coming with special stuff. I at least considered getting my own at some point. I could try playing Toy Story 3 and maybe a few Tales games at least. The PS4 though, there's a good reason I don't have one of those, and that is that it has absolutely nothing for me that I can't get on the Switch or PC. About the only thing I could have gotten out of one is the ability to buy physical copies of JRPGs cheaper. That would have come in handy for games like Ys 8 and the Atelier series, but not to the extent that it would have paid for the cost of the console. The PS5 is even worse, and not just because of the chip shortage. Sony's consoles have increasingly undergone a trend toward being just an Xbox but Japanese, and I am not about it. And on that note, Microsoft has never had an exclusive game in their 20 plus years of making consoles that I cared about, unless you count Tales of Vesperia and maybe Blue Dragon. Microsoft's games seem very much aimed primarily at adult men, and if you play most of them, you'll be doing a lot of aiming at adult men yourself. Sega is better in that regard, but I've never owned any of their consoles either, and about the only one with a decent library size is the Genesis. I've no idea what you play on a Master System. My knowledge of the Saturn's exclusives is exactly Panzer Dragoon Saga and Nights into Dreams, and I think the only Dreamcast exclusive that I cared about I already mentioned. As for the Genesis, I've brought up several Genesis games in this very episode, and I have yet to find any that I definitely want to play. The Game Boy Color is easy to emulate, but I don't know what I'd play on that either. I'm not interested in the Zelda Oracle games, Pokemon, or Shantae. I think there's a Wendy the Witch game that might be worth looking at. Finally, there's the matter of the 3DS. That system actually does have quite a few games on it that I liked, some of which I'd be interested in Let's Playing. Unfortunately, I have no way to record them. You can't find 3DS capture cards anywhere anymore, and 3DS emulation is still pretty inchoate. Honestly, I'm a bit leery of anything that requires a capture card anyway. I obviously managed it twice before, but I had some issues recording Tropical Freeze. Admittedly, I haven't used the device since then, and I think my current laptop is slightly better than the one I had in 2018. Heck, if I found a long enough USB cord, I might even be able to connect it to my desktop PC, since it's in the same room as most of my consoles now, as per my summer status update. Overall, though, I'd just like to reiterate what I said at the beginning of this project. The best games for me to do as Let's Plays are ones that I like and that are easy to record. If any game falls short on either of those things, it's naturally less likely. Creator's Commentary. This is when you play and comment on something that you made yourself. I would actually be interested in doing such a thing. It could be fun to play through and talk about a ROM hack that I've made, or an original game if I ever got that far. The problem with this is that it would require me to actually finish a project first. That may happen. I'm more than halfway through the Super Mario World hack that I've been working on, which is the farthest I've ever gotten on one. And I at least have plenty of ideas for homebrew and original indie games. I still want to make Plum's Worlds of Chaos, though in what capacity I'm not sure, and I might finish Peach's Quest to Princess Story, though it's not terribly likely at this point. To repeat, I'd be happy to do this if I ever finish anything that I could play. It's getting there that's the problem. Walkthrough videos. I've been thinking about these for a while, actually. I could make videos that explain how to beat various levels in games, find collectibles, and such. My main worry with these is that every game I'd want to do this with has probably already been done by many people before who are more skilled than I am in terms of gameplay, commentary, and video editing. One silly idea I had was to combine walkthroughs with adding lyrics to the game music, so basically I'd be explaining everything in musical form. It would be novel if nothing else, and it would be a lot of work, but it might be fun. What do you think, audience? Would you watch me talk about how to beat video games, or even sing about it? Live streams. I think I'm actually a bit more willing to do these than I used to be, but there are still a few obstacles in the way of doing them. Barriers to get over, if you will, channeling my inner Lloyd Bannings. For one, I'm not actually sure how to do them. All the time I see other people broadcast on Twitch with the text chat and even archives of the streams that can then be uploaded elsewhere as videos, but I don't know how they do any of that, and I don't generally have much luck asking any internet celebrities for anything. I'm also not sure what time of day would work well. I usually prefer to record things when I'm home alone, which coincidentally happens to be the same times when most people are at work and therefore can't watch. The best times for most people would probably be evenings. Now, that's not saying that it's impossible for me to stream at a weird time. I've seen a couple other people do it. Pink Kitty Rose seems to do hers around 11 a.m. my time, and Laura Shigihara does hers around 10 p.m. But when I already struggle with viewership, I'd want to do them at a time when the greatest number of people would be able to watch them, so maybe I just need to live in a different time zone. It would be nice to figure something out, but yeah, I already know how to record regular Let's Plays, and they're way easier to find time for. Redoing old Let's Plays to improve them. I played quite a few games on here before I really had very good equipment or software, and my voice and commentary quality was probably worse back then as well, so I wouldn't object to playing some games that I already covered back in the early 2010s. The question is whether people would actually watch them, and frankly I don't know if they would. I kind of feel like while there are still games that I haven't covered on the channel that I want to play, I don't really need to put effort toward ones that I already did unless they'll be well liked. Well, I think the main thing we learned from this episode is that I need to work through my backlog. There are a lot of games I haven't played that I might be at least mildly interested in, and some that I've played a little bit of that I could probably play more. I still don't have a definite rating for any of these, though you can probably tell about where most of them would fit and which one seemed the most or least promising based on my comments about them. Join me next time for some more games that I do have a rating for.